Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all participants around the world, depending on where you are. A very warm welcome to the launch of ACPF's new report entitled Uncovering Our Hidden Shame, Addressing Witchcraft Accusations and Ritual Attacks Against Children in Africa. My name is Reta Gitacho, and I'm the head of the Child Development and Protection Program at ACPF, and I'll be moderating this event today. We are here at our studio at the Ethiopian Skylight Hotel with a few invited guests and local journalists from Ethiopia. But we are also joined by more than 200 registered participants from all over across Africa and the world, from more than 45 countries who will be joining us today. So thank you very much for joining us. As we launch our new report, we will be hearing from our speakers who are representatives of governments, civil society organizations, renowned advocates and experts in the field of child rights and protection, as well as we'll also have writers and journalists. Before I introduce our speakers, let me say that our speakers will have 7 minutes each as they speak. While they speak, we will also be accepting questions from the media through the chat window. So those of you who are joining online, please send us your questions through the chat. Please note that there is interpretation. We have interpretation both in English as well as French. So now let's please welcome our first speaker, Dr. Joan Nyanyuki, who is ACPF's Executive Director. Dr. Joan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Reta. Good morning, good afternoon, Excellencies, representatives of governments and foreign missions, partners, friends, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this launch. It will be a somber session this afternoon, for we are here to uncover one of the most gruesome, almost indescribable forms of violence that our children face in Africa. Witchcraft accusations and ritual killings. Violence that is shrouded in shame, veiled in secrecy, under a blanket of silence, surrounded by taboos, yet affecting thousands of children and their lives. Violence that is related to witchcraft accusations and ritual killings is most times severe. It maims, disables, or kills the child. Yet the attention such violent attacks and killings receive does not correspond to the grave nature of the crimes they really are. That children with albinism living in most of our countries under this constant threat are ignored, denying them and other children at risk of the protection they are entitled to. It is therefore urgent that these violations receive the attention, visibility, publicity, and even outrage that will challenge them at family and community level, national and continental level, and hence the significance of this report, titled Uncovering Our Hidden Shame. Ladies and gentlemen, ACPF has been relentless in its effort to put hidden and neglected issues in the public discourse, urging governments to respond to seal the gaps that remain in upholding all the rights of all our children. This report, Uncovering Our Hidden Shame, focuses on addressing witchcraft accusations and ritual killings in Africa. It draws attention to witchcraft-related violent attacks and ritual killings of children across Africa as traditional practices that result in violence against children, harm children's mental and physical health, threaten their life and development. It builds on ACPF's 2016 report on crimes and extreme violence against children in Africa by documenting progress, but also what remains to be done, the gaps and the challenges. May I remind you, dear participants and listeners, that all African countries have ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of Children. Almost all have ratified the African Children's Charter. The UNCRC refers to abolishing traditional practices prejudicial to the health of children. The African Charter is even more explicit and detailed on the elimination of harmful social and cultural practices affecting the welfare, dignity, normal growth, and development of the child. Yet the report we are launching today shows that each year, thousands of children in Africa are accused of witchcraft and suffer gruesome ritual attacks and life-threatening violence that often result in their deaths. It documents the attempts at responses. It shows that in some countries, the structures and services for survivors, victims, and children at risk are beginning to take shape. But few countries have services specifically designed to rehabilitate children who suffer such attacks. But these attempts we document are sluggish, and they remain grossly inadequate. One major limitation is that the existing laws that prohibit violence against children are rarely used to prosecute perpetrators of witchcraft accusations. Why, you might ask? Two reasons that we documented. One is that psychological effects that children suffer in witchcraft accusations are often not recognized as violence. And secondly, because the broad interpretation that is required to offer adequate protection is virtually unknown in most countries. The huge gap in human capacity among criminal justice actors, child protection actors, service providers, and even community members about all these issues is discouraging. Ladies and gentlemen, within this reality, this report lays emphasis on the importance of strengthening existing national child protection systems, of making them more inclusive and holistic, able to protect all children, especially those at greatest risk, key among them children living with albinism. Integrating all forms of violence into existing child protection systems without the need to create new parallel structures is what works. But this will not be done without resources. And so we emphasize the important role of allocating sufficient human and financial resource that is well trained on how to detect, prevent, and respond to such hidden forms of violence. Last but most important is the role of families and communities. Witchcraft accusations always happen within the close confines of the family, in the community that surrounds the child, with family, friends, and neighbors often being involved. That is why they can be hidden and secretive. But parallel to this is the central role of the family in protecting children. And in our African cultures, the family goes beyond the nuclear and includes relatives, neighbors, sometimes the entire village, which it takes to raise an African child. It is this wider village community which therefore has the duty to cooperate with the state to protect the child at risk of being accused of witchcraft. The same is expected of religious leaders who, because of the mystique and superstitions surrounding the whole concept of witchcraft, bear a special responsibility in protecting children from witchcraft accusations and related violence. Ladies and gentlemen, as we launch this report today, it is a time for governments to do more in violence prevention, in protecting children from witchcraft-related violence and ritual attacks, for civil society, media, faith-based organizations, each one of us to do their part in raising awareness and complementing government's efforts, for communities to nurture their children, all children. This report puts forward many recommendations. It highlights gaps in laws and policies that need to be addressed, in service provision, in the legal and justice responses. But I will not delve into this now. What I will do is invite you to read the report, which is now available on our website, to use it to advocate for an end to this hidden shame that is driven by traditions and beliefs that are harmful to children, acts that go against the value that we as Africans place on our children. Thank you for honoring us with your time.
Thank you, Dr. Joan, for your welcoming remarks. I now invite our second speaker, Honorable Ava Gavar, to deliver her remarks. Honorable Gavar is from Nigeria, and she is a member, as well as the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Children for the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. Honorable Gavar, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much for having me. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues and partners, ladies and gentlemen, it is my singular honor to deliver these remarks at the launch of the report on witchcraft accusations and ritual attacks against children in Africa by the African Child Policy Forum. Let me begin by congratulating and commending the ACPF for launching this report, in the first place for conducting this study, and then launching this report for our wider use. As we are all aware, accusations of witchcraft and ritual attacks fall under the category of harmful traditional practices against children. As such, the launch comes at an opportune time, as we will be commemorating the Day of the African Child 2022 on June 16, under the theme, Eliminating Harmful Practices Affecting Children, Progress on Policy and Practices 2013. I believe the report will establish, or indeed has already established, the magnitude of the problem of witchcraft accusations and ritual attacks against children on the continent. And it has also identified and proposed what practical steps that could be taken to curtail, indeed to eliminate witchcraft accusations and ritual attacks against children in the continent. Through this, the report will be contributing to the elimination of harmful traditional practices affecting children in Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, the committee notes that a high number of children in the continent are accused of witchcraft and are victims of ritual attacks. Notably, reports and other resources available to the committee indicate a high prevalence in countries such as Tanzania, Nigeria, Ghana, DRC, among others. The committee further notes that children accused of witchcraft are usually discriminated against, neglected, victimized, shunned by parents and caregivers, abused and tortured, and in extreme cases, murdered. Undoubtedly, the prevalence of witchcraft accusations and ritual attacks on children has an impact on children's fundamental human rights, as stipulated in the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, particularly in Article 3, which talks of non-discrimination, in Article 4, which talks about the best interests of the child, Article 13 on children with disabilities, Article 16 on protection against child abuse and torture, and Article 21, which speaks specifically on protection against harmful and cultural practices in the continent. Those witchcraft accusations have negative psychological and psychosocial impact on children in the long term. The committee does not condone violence against children, and through its engagement with state parties, has sought a report, specific reporting on the issue of violence against children. Structurally, the committee has a special rapporteur on violence against children, that is myself, in order to stress the importance of these practices. And so the committee calls upon, I would like to call upon state parties as primary caregivers and duty bearers to take effective measures to ensure that all forms of violence against children are prohibited, and particularly witchcraft attacks, accusations and ritual attacks are prohibited against children. Accordingly, the state parties are called upon to, one, put in place legislations that criminalize witchcraft accusation and ensure effective implementation of these legislations. And state parties are also called upon to align themselves with their strategies with existing framework of the African Union, like the Agenda 2063, aspiration 6 of which speaks to prohibiting or eliminating all forms of violence against women and girls. And Agenda 24, the agenda for children and Africa Fit for Children, in Article 7, in Aspiration 7 of it, emphasizes that the child is protected against violence, exploitation, neglect, and abuse. And so the document provides and it aspires that by 2040, member states should ensure that no child is exposed to any form of violence, including gender-based violence, including harmful traditional practices like witchcraft accusations and ritual attacks. And so the committee has also issued several general comments around the issue of violence. And so the public, state parties, and all the public and all stakeholders are called to refresh their memories on the general comments of the committee, especially general comment number 1 and general comment number 5 that speak on these issues of violence. To conclude, I will remind that every year on 16 June, the African Union and its members observe the Day of the African Child. And we call for serious self-analysis and commitment towards addressing the numerous challenges they face in Africa. And the African Union has also organized a Pan-African 2-day colloquium on awareness of albinism. That was in October 2021. And so to conclude, I would like to call upon state parties to create awareness on around the issue of ritual attacks and to extend the level of awareness to the homes, to the families, to the communities where these practices are very prevalent. And also to provide care and protection for children accused of witchcraft and children who are survivors of these ritual attacks, and to facilitate awareness raising to transform attitudes of the communities towards ending these attacks, and then to strengthen collaboration with traditional and faith-based leaders as well as community leaders, and to build upon their influential voices and positions in the communities, and to harness from the relationship that they have. Above all, we call for state parties to be able to come up with data specific to issues of witchcraft accusations and ritual attacks for better programming and for response to this scourge. And finally, I wish to assure you that the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child remains committed to supporting and working with member states, civil society, organizations, and other relevant stakeholders, ensuring that children in Africa are protected from all forms of violence and harmful traditional practices. Accordingly, I call on all actors, on all hands to be on deck towards fighting this hidden abuse on the rights of the child. And on that note, I want to thank you sincerely on behalf of the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Gavar, for your remarks. I now invite our next speaker, Ms. Muluka Annie Mete Drummond, to deliver her remarks. Ms. Muluka is from Zambia, and she is the UN independent expert on the enjoyment of human rights by persons with albinism, a mandate she started in August 2021. Ms. Muluka, you can take the floor.
Thank you very much for having me. Good afternoon, esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols duly observed. I'd like to start by thanking the African Child Policy Forum for inviting me on this panel and for this study carried out by them. This study comes at quite a timely opportunity, as it is just before we commemorate International Albinism Awareness Day on June 13. The issue of harmful practices related to accusations of witchcraft and ritual attacks is one that is rarely talked about. Often when we meet as human rights activists, academics, and professionals of all walks of life, we do not want to talk about witchcraft. After all, how can we as intelligent, enlightened people sit around talking about the stuff of a bygone era, the stuff of fiction, the stuff that our ancestors, without the wisdom of modern science and knowledge, allowed themselves to be ruled by? Some of you listening to me today are offended by what I've just said. Some of you are nodding your head in agreement. Well, the fact is that whether we believe in witchcraft or not, whether you think that this is genuine or comical, there are people out there who do believe in it. And because they believe in it, children and adults are being subjected to heinous and harmful practices. Good afternoon again. My name is Buluka Anmiti Drummond, and I am the UN Independent Expert on the Enjoyment of the Rights of Persons with Albinism. In my role, I constantly receive reports of children being abducted, having their body parts mutilated, and living in fear of adults, if at all they get to live. They live in fear of adults, including their own family members, who may want to come back and take other body parts of them. And the reason this is done is because they look different, because their skin is lighter, and because people do not understand their condition. And because people don't understand this, then they automatically assume that that persons with albinism must be witches or useful for witches. Let's be clear, this is not something that just happens to children. Adults are affected too, but children are disproportionately affected. And once again, whether you believe in witchcraft or not, there is no denying that witchcraft is having a negative impact in the world, and this impact needs to be addressed. Now, I wasn't invited here today simply to depress you or to disrupt your worldview. I was invited to shed some light and some hope into an otherwise dark and hidden subject. Thankfully, harmful practices related to accusations of witchcraft and harmful attacks are being brought more and more into human rights discourse. At the UN level, Mind Mandate was set up mainly as a response to such harmful practices in 2015. And a number of reports from the mandate provide recommendations on dealing with these issues as they relate to persons with albinism. In 2017, my predecessor, Ms. Iro, organized an expert workshop looking into these concerns in Geneva. This, to a great extent, culminated in the adoption of the UN Resolution 47/8 on the elimination of harmful practices related to witchcraft and ritual attacks last year. While it recognizes the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, as well as traditional, complementary, and integrative medicine, the resolution condemns harmful practices related to accusations of witchcraft and ritual attacks. It highlights that these practices are often carried out against persons with albinism, persons with disabilities, older persons, women, and children. It also calls for regional and international initiatives that are relevant for the local context. Thankfully, the African continent has also been looking at these issues and developing recommendations that are relevant to the African context. Examples of these include the Regional Action Plan on Albinism, which ran from 2017 to 2021 and was later replaced by the AU Plan of Action on Ending Attacks and Discrimination Against Persons with Albinism, 2021 to 2031. Earlier this year, the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child adopted Resolution 19/2022, which also touches on such practices. Of course, the protocols on disability and older persons are also a framework for dealing with harmful practices related to accusations of witchcraft and ritual attacks that need to be ratified. And the Pan-African Parliament have guidelines on the elimination of these practices that are pending adoption. Now, we all know that policy documents are useless unless implemented, which is why it is also important to highlight what is being done at national level. Authorities in several countries in the region are collaborating with civil society in addressing the problem. Countries like Mozambique, Uganda, and Malawi have carried out research and data collection to understand the extent of the problem and how to respond to it. Budgets are being allocated in several countries to relevant programs to stop such attacks, including awareness-raising programs. Initiatives have been put in place to work with traditional leaders and healers. There have also been legal reviews and reforms carried out to regulate such traditional healers, the possession of body parts and human tissue, as well as to ensure trafficking laws and other criminal laws are applicable in relation to such attacks. In addition to this capacity building of state actors has also been carried out in a number of countries to ensure that they are able to respond. In some countries, police have signed MOUs with CSOs to facilitate greater collaboration with investigations. Most recently, we can see how these laws and capacity building are resulting in the prosecution of individuals. So most recently in Malawi, 3 men were convicted and sentenced to 155 years each in relation to the ritual killing of a person with albinism. On the 26th of May as well in Malawi, another person was convicted to 30 and 40 years for the killing of a person with albinism. As we speak right now, there's another case in the Malawi courts relating to the killing of a young child with albinism, and the sentence will be carried out today at some point. So there are moves, there are developments in this regard. There have also been social protection measures put in place to help those more vulnerable to attacks, as well as those who are more likely to be involved in attacks due to personal situation. So while there's still a lot to be done, a lot is being done. We will need to continue gathering information on the issues, making our findings known, bringing these acts to light, implementing recommendations, and learning from the challenges that we face, as well as adapting as the perpetrators of these attacks adapt. It is a challenge, but it is a challenge that with time and commitment can be overcome. I thank you all for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Muluka, for your remarks. I now invite our next speaker, Honorable Lady Justice Teresia Mateka, to deliver her remarks. Honorable Lady Justice Mateka is from Kenya, and she is the judge of the High Court of Kenya and the chairperson of the Special Task Force on Children Matters at the National Council on the Administration of Justice. Honorable Mateka, you have the floor.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Shikamo, hamjambo, all protocol observed. Let me just say, if by dint of your age or relationship you could call me Mama, my people would require me to greet you Wacha, and your response would simply be Growing up in the outskirts of the city with parents deeply rooted in their rural village, I spent all my school holidays from when I was about 9 in the village with my cousins. I recall getting the very wise advice from one of them that if a certain woman was to greet me, my response had to be, Nandokandoe, literally, that I respect you, but do not bewitch me. He warned me that in default, I could be the next victim of her witchcraft. As a child, and even at my age, I had no idea how that had been determined. At that time, I did not have the capacity to question things that were and still are shrouded in fear and mystery, resulting in stigma and trauma. Reflecting on what the judiciary can do to protect victims of witchcraft accusations and ritual attacks brought back these memories and questions. How I felt as a child when I met that woman. How did that woman feel? What if it was a fellow child? What if I was that child? What if that woman was my mother? The Witchcraft Act in Kenya contains nothing on ritual attacks, but makes it an offense to accuse one of witchcraft of being a witch. These terms are not defined, but such accusations have led to killings, burning of homes, and excommunication from communities, with children being both direct and secondary victims. We all know that for courts to act, there must be a cause or a case placed before them. In our country, the Constitution empowers courts to uphold and enforce the rights of all persons where there could be a denial, violation, infringement of, or threat to a right of fundamental freedom, and it also entrenches the best interests of the child principle. Witchcraft accusations and ritual attacks on children amount to denial, infringement, threats, and a violation to the whole range of rights and fundamental freedoms of children, starting with the right to life, including the right to even to childhood. And this, of course, makes it become an issue of access to justice. We know that courts depend on others to present the cases, that will warrant the appropriate protective orders and are alive to the fact that child protection requires the hand of everyone, from the family, the community, the informal and formal agencies, and also children themselves participating. We are aware, and we've heard from every other speaker before me, that it's not an issue of law or the absence of protective measures. The key challenge for the justice system becomes how to identify these children as they enter the justice system, and to be conscious of those who may be invisible victims because it is the parents or relatives accused of witchcraft, how to see through that peculiar case of child neglect, or that case of assault, or that case of sexual assault or grievous harm or even murder, how to spot the potential victims and to take the precautionary appropriate measures that are clearly laid out in our laws. The court can require a purposive investigation by the police and children and probation officers that can identify the vulnerabilities of the victims, that is, children who enter the justice system through any other means like I've explained, and the use of social inquiry reports to reveal all those other issues that may not come through in the criminal case or any case presented before the court, to enable the court to make the requisite orders that may include rescue of the child, protection of that child, including witness protection, rehabilitation that may include counseling, psychosocial support, and reintegration back in the family, and any other interventions within the society. For all this to happen, there must be collaboration. In my country, we have the National Council on the Administration of Justice headed by the Chief Justice. This is a body that is mandated to ensure a coordinated, efficient, effective, and consultative approach to the administration of justice and reform of the justice system. It set up the special task force that I chair. This task force is to look into the issues of children in the administration of justice. What it has done is to replicate the NCAJ at every court station as a children court users committee, whose role is to implement the mandate of the NCAJ with respect to access to and delivery of justice to children. The CCUC, which is a model I recommend, is chaired by the Children Court Magistrate. It brings together all the local children, state and non-state justice agencies in the magistrate's court's jurisdiction. That includes the police and everyone else, the local NGOs, the CBOs, the faith-based organizations, the media, and it has become the vehicle for addressing emerging issues on child protection and access to justice. The CUC has the advantage of cutting across the diverse communities in this country. CUCs present a forum where this conversation can be had and an opportunity to use it as a forum for access to justice for children to achieve the social transformation we need to deal with this particular issue. The judiciary here, having entrenched thematic annual service weeks for children, again gives the same CUCs the opportunity to interact with members of the public, and therefore a place where this discussion can be held and enabling the members to address the root causes, identification of the victims, protection of these victims, and ways in which to protect them with respect to access to justice. We have another opportunity here, which is the recognition of our alternative justice system, traditional dispute resolution mechanisms, and infusing them with our constitutional values and the respect for human rights. Of course, the judiciary recommending amendments to the Witchcraft Act to align it to our constitution so that it can carry the values of our constitution towards protection of any persons who may end up charged with offenses under it. The dissemination of this report, for which I thank the SCPF for its work through our CCUCs, and I'm sure in all the other countries, any similar organization, will not only raise awareness and the consciousness of the justice actors, but also lower the fear and consternation that is usually brought by this issue. And because we say justice is the responsibility of everybody, that is haki ni jukumu letu sote in matters access to justice, there can be no shame or fear. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Justice Mathika, for your remarks. I now invite our next speaker. Our next speaker is Mr. Mohamedou Lamine Cissé to deliver his remarks. Mr. Cissé is from Mali. He is the president of the African-wide Movement for Children, an AMC in short. An AMC is a Pan-African civil society organization network of over 100 child-focused organizations and institutions in Africa. So, Mr. Cissé, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Mesdames et messieurs les organisateurs.
Ladies and gentlemen, organizers, dear panelists, technical and financial partners, dear participants, it's a great honor and a pleasure on behalf of AMC to take the floor and to bring my contribution to the launch of this important report that is considered taboo in many regards. We know that many children are accused of witchcraft, which is a recurrent phenomenon. And sometimes we see ritual attacks as well. And these practices needs to be documented, and we need to denounce these attacks. And we need to continue to work with organizations that are working for the protection for children. These ritual attacks are a type of violence against children, and it puts the lives of the children in danger. But we don't talk enough about it. Like my predecessors mentioned, this form of violence includes the accusation of witchcraft, ritual attacks, body mutilation, killing the child, and ill treatment of children. The conviction that they need to be saved from ill spirit. Scientific studies show that this is unfounded. We've seen this in Burkina Faso, DRC, Benin, Malawi, Tanzania, Niger, where we see all types of practices. So it is necessary that we set up institutional framework to better protect the children. Most of the African countries have signed the African Charter on the Welfare of Children, and they have ratified many conventions, namely the protection against violence on children. And many countries have adopted national legislations so as to make progress in protecting children. But despite that, many states did not give enough attention to these different forms or types of violence when they were developing these national protective strategies on the protection of the child. We are witnessing the lack of judicial instrument, adequate judicial instrument, and the implementation of the existing law is lacking, very weak. Civil society organizations have to review and also look into the legal framework that is supposed to protect the children against ritual attacks. We need to strengthen the role of civil societies, and to make sure that we have a better impact. As you may know, CSOs play an important role in terms of documenting these issues of ritual attacks and witchcraft. And civil society can also help improve the situation in many countries if they are better involved. So there needs to be more active, more advocacy. For example, we've had some assisted children that are victims of these types of attacks, be it in Nigeria or Western Africa, and they are calling upon many entities working the protection of children. We need to strengthen and also capitalize on the different organizations that are working on the welfare of children. Communities and families have an important role to play in protecting these children as well. So we need to sensitize the communities and sensitize them on the root causes of these ritual attacks and witchcraft practices. Sensitization has to be done at all levels, at all sectors, and implement as well the laws. We need to guarantee accountability and demonstrate a serious commitment when it comes to the violation of these children's laws. CSOs have to also work hand in hand with the government in improving protection system for children in regards to the ritual attacks and the witchcraft. There is a lot to be done. We as CSOs, we need to give ourselves the tools, but we need to support the government to reach their goals so that in the future years we see this phenomenon going down, because this is something that is negatively affecting Africa. And I would like to thank ACPF and all the actors that came to this panel to discuss about this important matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sise, for your remarks. I now invite our last speaker, Ms. Adaobi Tricia Naobani, to deliver her remarks. Ms. Adaobi is from Nigeria, and she is a novelist, a journalist, and essayist. One of her novels, Buried Beneath the Baobab Tree, was written based on interviews with girls kidnapped from Boko Haram, and it won, several prizes. Ms. Adaobi, you have the floor.
Rita, thank you to the ACPF for inviting me here to speak today. So I'll make it clear from the beginning that I was invited to speak with my fellow journalists. I'm not just here to speak with everyone, but specifically to my fellow journalists. We've heard all that everyone has said today and the dire reports from, about witchcraft accusations against children. And we know that this is just one of the many acts of violence against children around the continent. And I want us to see ourselves today, if there's anything we take away from this meeting as journalists, is the fact that we have a superpower that can be put to use to rescue African children, Africa's children, precious children, from these acts of violence, especially in this case, acts of witchcraft. Now we have a superpower. I know that this ability we have, this gift, this skill, the platforms are often abused on the continent in various ways, But we mustn't forget who we are. Yes, we may be poorly paid. We may not be paid as much as we wish to, but we do have a job to do. It's not just a job we have, it's a responsibility. Imagine Superman. When I say superpower, I mean it exactly like, imagine Superman or Batman, whoever they are, just, flying in to rescue someone from devastation or destruction. That's exactly the kind of role we play in a situation like this. So we're not just to sit around following government officials, printing and reprinting what they have spoken, but we do have a responsibility to our people, and in this specific case, to our children. Now, these stories that we've heard, we have to flood the media with them. We have to keep telling the stories. I mean, you would imagine that everybody knows these things happening around the continent, but I've written stories where people told me, come on, it's a lie, you fabricated it. I get, messages from Africans around the continent, in my country, around the world, telling me, no, it can't be true, because there are things that happen that are just almost impossible to believe. But without us speaking about these things, writing about them, our people wouldn't know. Our government will be too uncomfortable and may not have, be pushed to do anything about them. But we need to make ourselves uncomfortable. Yes, as Muluka said earlier on, that sometimes we find these things shameful to talk about, but let's endure the shame for a period, looking forward to the good that comes out of it, because we go through that period of shame, and then at the end, let's look forward to what, the end result, where we have that situation that causes shame doesn't exist with us anymore. All different societies around the world went through different things where they had shameful situations, circumstances they were dealing with, and the people just put this situations at the forefront of the conversations. These things were talked about consistently, and there was change. There was change eventually. So that's the role we need to play on this continent. Now, people are going to accuse you of all sorts of things. It has happened to me. People have accused me of perpetrating a single story, but I tell them I'm more concerned about the negative situations on the continent than about the fact that those negative stories are being told. I am more concerned about eradicating those situations, those conditions. They're going to tell you it's enough. You've talked about this thing enough. Is that the only thing you can write in a little while and back out? We need to keep talking about these things. Is everybody, my system seems to have hung. Is it just mine, or is everybody? So anyway, we need to stay on these stories, flood the media with them. Even when people tell you, is it not enough? Aren't you tired of telling the stories? Keep telling the stories. Stay on it. I think there's certain situations that, there's certain things that happen in Africa, like these witchcraft accusations against children, that I think we should be so ashamed of these things that even at the airports, we should hide. When we go abroad, we should hide. People should ask us about them. And yes, they should make us hide. We should be so ashamed until we're compelled to do something about it. I remember a particular story in Nigeria about a couple who were rescuing children. There were communities around Abuja, the capital city of Abuja, where, I have my home, was still killing twins. And when the media started writing about these things, this couple was telling their story. I also wrote about that story. They were summoned by the government of the city, and they said, "You're giving our city a bad name. Why are you fabricating something just because you want to get money from white people?" And they had to come and show evidence that was exactly what was happening, that there were communities that were killing twins. I'm talking about 2018. It's not something that happened decades ago. And they had to show proof, and the government, so from then onwards, the government was able to support them well, even though, of course, not as much as you would hope. And then they got a lot of help from the stories from the international community. And gradually that thing, that situation is being brought to an end. So ignore the criticisms, ignore the people who keep questioning you about why you stay on one particular story. Stay on it. It may take years. Keep on until you see change. So I encourage us today, as I round off my speech, to say, be aware of the superpower you have, the power to cause change to happen, the power to make people uncomfortable until they are forced to do something that they can do, whatever they can do and whatever they have to do. So let's go with that mandate today and make sure that the report is well covered. People know about these things and see what we can do to bring about change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Naobani, for your remarks. Thank you again, all our esteemed speakers, for your insightful remarks. Now we'll go straight to the question and answer session. We've been accepting written questions through the chat window. I'll come back to it shortly. But there are also colleagues who joined us online and who would like to ask directly, so I will give them a chance. So those of colleagues online who joined us online and who would like to ask questions, please raise your hand, and our colleagues will give you the opportunity to speak. And please, when you ask, make sure you ask only 1 or 2 questions, only for 2 minutes, max. First online, and then I'll come back to the room. Until people online are ready to ask those questions, let me read out some of the questions that came directly through the chat. So let me, in the meantime, then, in the interest of time, let me address some questions that came through the chat window. The first is for Ms. Muluka. Ms. Muluka, thank you for highlighting the plight of persons with albinism in general and children with albinism in particular in your remarks. And there is this widespread assumption about the existence of lucrative market for the body parts of persons with albinism. This assumption is fueling violence, it says the question, including killings of children with albinism. That the market really exists. Has any of your evidence proven that? And what can be done about it? Ms. Muluka, you can address this question.
It is indeed a question that people have asked. And what I can say about this is that it is a question. We have not uncovered the markets as such, but we have uncovered evidence that points to the existence of a market. We have had cases of individuals attempting to sell body parts, and they've been arrested while attempting to sell body parts, unfortunately, in their case, to the wrong people, to the wrong market, but they have been attempting to sell body parts. We have received reports that also specify, the amount that body parts go for in the markets, and I would hesitate to specify that because I don't want to be incentivizing any market or contributing to that. But there are quite high amounts that these are, and it's a concern for us that these information is being spread around that there's this kind of market for persons with albinism. We know that one of the root causes is poverty, and that in many cases it's family members as well who are involved. We have information, at least in 2017, we had one case in South Africa where a traditional healer was convicted for actually commissioning body parts. In this case, it's one of the cases where we've actually had the person who's sourcing the body parts being convicted. So there is a belief, we do have reasons to believe that there is a market out there. And we also know that there's spikes in attacks against persons with albinism during political elections as well, which also seems to indicate the existence of a market as well due to this misbelief. And I have to emphasize wrong belief about the body parts and their properties.
Thank you, Ms. Muluka. There is also a question to Lady Justice Matika. So the question says, beyond the explicit prohibition of harmful practices by the law, what more can be done to strengthen the justice system as a whole to be able to effectively respond to this form of violence against children? Lady Justice Matika, if you may.
Okay, thank you very much, Rita, for the question. As I indicated when I spoke about the justice system, what needs to be done to strengthen more? I think awareness is the first thing. Awareness that issues of witchcraft accusation and ritual attacks are actually issues of injustice, just like we talk about mob injustice. That people driven, of course, we know that it's beliefs and fears and other things that we may not understand. So I was responding to the question as to what more can be done to strengthen the justice system. And I was saying that one of the things that exists in the justice system, in my understanding, is that one, I have not seen in my almost 30 years in the service a single child charged with the offense. But we have heard of children being affected by this, maybe accused or affected by all this. So the one thing that is true is that we will not see a child maybe being brought to court accused of those things, because they either will have been killed or something will have happened to them. But the perpetrator will be brought to court. Or the thing we'll see is a child who has been brought for either being neglected or for something else that is not related to this. So the one thing that we can do is to just create that awareness that the actors in the justice system are aware that there exist such crimes against children, so that they can be conscious of the fact that when a child enters the justice system, they need to look at the issue a bit more. So that's one. And then, of course, knowledge without skill, like we need to train people and also give them the skill on how to investigate these matters. What do they look out for? Of course, the other place is the law itself. In my country, as I've said, the Witchcraft Act does not give definitions. So if a police officer is going to investigate an accusation of what this is, what are the ingredients of that offense? So that if somebody is accused of having done something to a child in relation to witchcraft, because we are talking about that, they'll be brought maybe having been an assault or something else, but in relation to witchcraft, then we may not get that information. So the fact that the laws also need to be very clear in terms of what they intend to achieve, so that the judiciary or the courts are able to deal with that. But as I said earlier, I think, and collaboration definitely. This is not one agency's work. It is not the work of the judiciary or police or everyone along the chain, the justice chain must know what's going on and be alive to what's going on, so that working together, we can actually ensure that when the report arrives, at the end of the day, the investigation will have been done properly, and all the other protections that come into are required for this child are put in place. Let me just end by saying that children will enter the justice system through so many other ways, and the child who is a victim of these witchcraft accusations may actually be invisible to the system. So that what needs to be done is just that awareness, so that people are able to look out for that invisible child. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Mathika. Great. So let's keep the questions coming. We'll be accepting also some questions from the audience. I'll give you a chance later on. There is a question for Ms. Adaobi. So Ms. Adaobi says, thank you for stressing the role of traditional and religious leaders in combating accusations of witchcraft and ritual attacks. How can journalists and writers like yourself help traditional and religious leaders in their efforts to promote positive change in public attitudes towards witchcraft and ritual attacks? Ms. Adaobi, if you can.
The thing is, there are different ways of covering a negative situation. Sometimes you cover a negative situation, and that's my favorite way of doing it, through the perspective of people who are already doing something positive about that negative situation. So, you're writing about witchcraft attacks, but at the same time, you're talking about somebody who is already doing something or who has done so much already. So in cases like where we have traditional rulers or traditional leaders or religious leaders doing something, it'll be excellent to highlight their work, promote what they're doing. And in doing that, we can actually give people a prototype to copy. So we're telling this story, somebody else in some other community, somebody in Mali reads about what's happening in Nigeria, copies the same thing, achieves the same result, somebody in Sudan, somebody in Sierra Leone, and on it goes. So that's an excellent way of covering the work of traditional leaders and religious leaders in what they do to curb the accusations of witchcraft against children.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Adaobi. To Honorable Aver Gavar, so it says, what is the committee doing or plans to do to support member states in their efforts to address these crimes in forms of violence? Honorable Gava.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, the committee, during engagement or in the process of engagement with state party reports, engages and holds a constructive dialogue with delegates of such a state. Within this time, the committee is able to engage with representatives of that state party on a very important issue. Of course, all the child rights are important, but on something that is a subject matter that is topical. And so this is now topical, and in that process the committee can engage with different state parties, especially those that have a high prevalence of this acts. And that is one. The African Union has appointed a special rapporteur on FGM, and also in consideration there's also harmful traditional practices generally. And the committee can provide experts engagement, expert advice, can carry out training. Really, the committee supports sometimes through visits, through fact finding, and supports some of the actions by state parties. And so in that way, in the process of that engagement, the committee may be able to support and promote this campaign. Above all, like I indicated in the remarks, we have the general comments, that are very pertinent to this issue, that are in the public domain, and will be a good guide to actors out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Gava. Can we take at least a few questions from the room? Introduce yourself very briefly and then go directly to the question.
Thank you very much for having this chance. My name is Baltar Sunnat, and I came from Now Television. My first question goes to, I saw some points on the report, and I feel that there are such weird news to be tackled soonest. And when I come to my question, in how many countries you have conducted your research, and estimatedly how many children are suffering such a problem is related with the witchcrafting? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Any other question?
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Obolisa. I'm from Ahadu TV. So my question is to the director of this forum. Is there any plan where you can, when you come to work in person on this matter, because you have repeatedly mentioned that the government is becoming negligent on this issue. So you passed the responsibility to society, to government, to religious leaders too. But do you have any plans on taking matters to hand?
Thank you so much. My name is Gruma and I'm from ACPFN. And my question goes to Lady Justice Mateka. And Muluka, the independent expert, was raising the fact that there are very progressive judgments from Malawi in terms of bringing the perpetrators to justice. And I'm wondering if it is possible, and if there are rooms in the Kenyan justice sector for the kind of, if I am allowed to say, judicial activism in terms of adopting or taking the jurisprudence of cases in Malawi and set a good precedent in the Kenyan judicial system. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I check my colleagues if there are if there is one or two person who are interested in asking question and waiting online? Anyone raising their hands? Anyone? No? Okay. Great. So I'll come back to Dr. Juan to address questions related to ACPF. There is also another question that came through the chat window for Dr. Juan. Let me read it briefly. It says, after the study and the launch, what will be the actions of the ACPF that will follow in order to bring states to act in regards to WARA. So I think this question is related to the last question raised. So Dr. Joan will come back to the answer, but before I invite her, if there are two more questions to our colleagues. One is for Ms. Muluka. Ms. Muluka, there is a question for you. Can you tell us a bit more about the report and guidelines for parliamentarians on ending witchcraft accusations and ritual attacks against children in Africa? You mentioned that there is this guideline that was validated by the Pan-African Parliament. So what is it for, and at what stage is it right now? Just briefly, and then I'll come back to Dr. Joan.
The guidelines basically are for parliamentarians, looking at measures that can be adopted at national level. They look at non-legal measures and community-based measures, as well as measures for creating an enabling legal environment, and for coordinated responses. Just to say, the guidelines were to be adopted last year during the session of the Pan-African Parliament. However, the Pan-African Parliament had to close suddenly, and so there was not time for it to be adopted. We're still waiting for the Parliament to convene again and hoping that these guidelines will be adopted. But they looked set to be adopted, and it was just unfortunate that the Parliament had to be disbanded quite suddenly.
Thank you, Ms. Muluka. Dr. Joan?
So I think those are, is it 3 questions for me? I think the first one, in terms of the first question that was asked, in my understanding, is about documenting the prevalence of witchcraft-related accusations and killings. And you see very well that the title of our report says uncovering, and the word hidden. The extent of documentation of these actions, of these forms of violence, is very difficult to establish. So for instance, in the study that we carried out, we would have wanted actually initially to do in-depth study into 10 African countries. But the paucity of data, the scarcity of evidence across the continent is a huge constraint for us, even when we research on the subject. And therefore that constrains even the depth and scope of what we are able to document. And so and it links now, I'm going to the second question. And so when you ask the question of how does ACPF take the matters to hand, one of the things ACPF then does is say that we know that witchcraft-related killings, accusations, abuses are happening in countries 1, 2, 3, anecdotal evidence. But where is the empirical evidence? And so we go to these governments, we write to them, we engage with them, we meet with them, and we tell them this anecdotal evidence. What are you doing about documenting this? Where is the empirical evidence? And it is the responsibility of states then to do that. At the same time, an additional action is to share what we have with civil society actors, NGO partners on the ground in those countries, and tell them, can you duplicate this report that ACPF has compiled for your sub-region and for your continent? And so for us, this report is a tool for advocacy. Its strengths are things that we will scale up, but the very limitations of these reports, the gaps in the data, the paucity of evidence, is in itself a sign that much more needs to be done by governments. And so we will keep on speaking about this issue and documenting what is progressive. And I think this question was asked by the ACPF colleague in terms of how do we make sure that what's happening in Malawi is being learned and shared across the continent so that other countries can also adopt these good practices. So that is an additional thing that ACPF we do. We have a huge program on access to justice for children. So we will include, for instance, the element of children who are accused. What are the options in terms of a justice system that responds to them? The last question, and I think I've touched a little bit on it, Retta, is how ACPF will bring states to act. I wish ACPF had the ability to bring states to act. We don't have the ability to compel them to act. What we do is we draw attention. We draw states' attentions to the issues, and we try to complement what's happening at the UN level. You can see now we have an independent expert. We have the second one appointed. We can see what the committee is doing on the Day of the African Child. So we try again to reinforce those efforts which are going on globally and continentally, and to keep talking. And I think it was Miss Adaobi who actually said about keep talking, put words to these things. So that is one of the things that ACPF can do. And lastly, one of the bigger endeavors that we are working towards is working in collaboration with the Africa Committee and the Special Rapporteur, Madame Ava, on developing guidelines on how governments can prevent and respond to violence against children. Because there's a lot of frameworks. You have it in the Agenda 2063, Agenda 2040, you have it in the SDGs, we have it in our constitution and in our laws. We have all these elements reflected in all these documents. And so sometimes you'll find governments which are dealing with children's issues from health, governments have so many issues to deal with. So to coordinate it and to make it simpler, we are working with a committee to make sure that we can present one simple set of guidelines that enable states to do this in a comprehensive, collaborative way. And in these guidelines, of course, we will make sure that the hidden forms of violence against children, such as the witchcraft-related killings, are reflected, and that there is room then to scale this up to perhaps other forms that we still do not know about. So it's ongoing work that is constantly in progress. Thank you. Retta?
Thank you so much, Dr. John. From the audience, shall I ask one opportunity? And then I have one question from that came through the chat window, so we'll go back to that. But is there anyone who would like to take this opportunity from this room? Great. Yes, please. Introduce yourself and address it to a particular speaker.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Beza from KMG. My question is, the agenda is so interesting. It has been a spiritual kind of agenda. And now it is a shift in the secular environment. How is it flavored in the secular world? My question is, I think this goes to ACPF, because religious institutions and non-secular denominations have been using or have been activating in this sector. Now that the secular world or the secular community is, I think ACPF is trying to bring the attention, drawing attention, like you said, on the desk of ministers and the desk of elites. So how is the transition looking like? And how, it is really interesting. And how is it, getting the buy-in from the elites? Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for the question. We'll come back to Dr. Juan. But let me read also the other question that was directed to Mr. Sise. It says, are there cases of accusations of Wara in the West Africa? How do you assess the scale of the problem in the West Africa? Mr. Sise, 2 minutes. So Mr. Sise was disconnected, that's why he will come back. But to our other speakers, are there any question that you would like to address now, including the religious, the question related to the role of how to engage religious institutions and leaders from our speakers before come back to. Okay, so John, I'm coming back to you.
First of all, I think I really want to acknowledge the presence of KMG. KMG has been a long-standing partner of ACPF working here in Ethiopia to end FGM. And if I'm not wrong, they were the second winners of the Larissa Award, of the Guy Larissa Award. So thank you for your persistence. And it is your persistence that I think was being mentioned about by the journalist when she said we have to keep speaking about it, put words to it, and be consistent and persistent in our efforts to improve the lives of children. So congratulations, KMG, and it's great to see you again. So to your question, which is a very, very difficult question, and I was hoping one of the other speakers would pick it up. When you go through the report, you will find that the report actually addresses the role of faith-based leaders and religious institutions, as well as the traditional ones. And what the report highlights is how we can use religious leaders and religious beliefs positively rather than negatively. because there's a lot of mystique and superstition that surrounds witchcraft. But how do we use the element of religion, these values that we hold, positively rather than negatively? So for instance, it recommends that we look for alternative religious rituals which are more respectful of the child, of family members, and of the communities to deal with the anxieties that drive perpetrators to actually accuse children of witchcraft. Because it's like a double-edged sword. These beliefs will work both ways, positively or negatively. So how do we convert them and make them work for us positively? Positive, shall I say, rituals, positive exorcism in a way that protects the child and is in their best interests. And so, for instance, when you think of cleansing, for those who have religious beliefs, whether it's in modern or traditional religions, there are rituals for cleansing. So if there are such allegations, how do we work? How do communities work with their religious leaders within their faith beliefs? Because we also have to be respectful of communities and different cultures and their faith beliefs. How do we work with that positively and make it work for us? And I think there's no better example, actually, than what has been done in FGM, making culture work positively. So how do we make religion also work positively? I think that's the extent to which the report addresses that issue. I think lastly, it's also to say, and links to your question on spiritual issues becoming secular issues, is so that rights, well-being, all these conversations don't happen. There's no human rights world. The world is multidimensional. So there's our cultural beliefs, there's our religious beliefs, there's the law, the legal frameworks, there's communities and what they aspire for, and all of these things happen together. So how do we make sure that all of these things reinforce each other positively, and hence the role of communities? Because at the end, there's no child that lives at the African Union. Every child lives in their community, and that's exactly where the changes have to happen. Back to you, Rita.
Thank you, Dr. Joan. We were briefly disconnected from our online participants. That's why they did not pick up the questions, but they are back now and they would like to speak. So first, Honorable Matheka, you can take the floor.
Thank you very much. There was a question for me with respect to whether there is room for what is happening in Malawi to happen in Kenya. And I would just say that we take cases of violence against children seriously, in any case that we brought to court, because I have not seen any so far where someone has been charged specifically with ritual attacks against a child, but there are serious sentences against such offenses, but not we haven't seen any with respect to that. But the Kenyan courts have gone quite far in getting such hidden issues to the fore. I think if you remember our case on intersex, where the judge, by then it was Justice Lenaola, now he's a judge of the Supreme Court, actually made what we call a structural interdict, directing the Attorney General to form a special task force on intersex persons to look at the gaps in the law, the data collection, and all those things. And because of that directive from the court, we can now speak about intersex persons openly. And that was an issue that would not be spoken about. People are living in fear and all that. And why I'm speaking about it is because there's a parallel here of a hidden evil against children. People don't want to discuss that particular issue, but I'm sure if an opportunity presented itself to a court in this country as a constitutional issue with respect to what we can do about such hidden issues, we already have a precedent that would take it even further, where government would be made to do what they're supposed to do with respect to upholding the rights of innocent persons who suffer at the hands of such people, and especially children. And that way we'll be able to get everything on the table and remove it from where it is hidden. I just wanted to respond to that. And then secondly, about the report, I do not know whether there's a way SCPF can have these reports given to the countries formally, the African countries formally. because I heard Dr. Nyanyuki talk about dissemination, but if they get to us formally, then we are held responsible as countries to implement or to look into the issues that arise out of that. Because we can read it, we can read the reports, those of us who are here or anyone else, but if the countries are given these reports formally, I think either the judiciaries or the governments, whichever way that is good for SCPF, I think it would make a good step forward into making sure that something is done by the different countries on what that report contains. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Justice. So the last person, sorry to keep you waiting, Mr. Cissé. So you have 2 minutes, you can address the audience.
Merci beaucoup. Je vais répondre à M. Kébé qui nous demande s'il y a des cas d'enfants.
If there are cases of children accused of witchcraft in West Africa, if yes, to say in which country? To my knowledge, in the report, we mention Mali, Benin in the report, but I can say that the use of the genitals of children, especially children with albinism in countries such as Mali, at the close of elections, because the genitals of those children in particular are used for mystical purposes. And there are sometimes requested by some charlatans who seek those parts in order to acquire the power to win elections, to get money. So children are victims of such practices in Mali. I carry out campaigns to engage the government, among others, in order to end this practice. Now, when you read the report, you realize that in countries such as Nigeria, there have been some provisions made to fight against that phenomenon, even in Benin, where voodoo is widespread. I also believe that when it comes to witchcraft, our religious practices also have an impact. It is considered differently from one end of the continent to the other, from one region to the other. In West Africa, there are some practices that are tolerated based on the religion, because Islam has also put some barriers, making such that in countries such as Senegal, the practice is less rampant than in other countries, such as in countries where voodoo is prevalent, in Togo, in Benin, as well as in Nigeria. So such practices, when they are even found, are not necessarily recognized. So we cannot tell you specifically which case involve children accused of witchcraft, but culturally, we know that it's a reality. In West Africa, in such countries as Senegal, in Gambia, it is less rampant. Children being mutilated for commercial purposes, that is a reality in Mali as well as in other West African countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Cissé. So that's all we can take for the time available. You can still send us your questions through email and we'll respond to you. As Dr. Joan said earlier, we are pleased to inform you that our report, Uncovering Our Hidden Shame, Addressing Witchcraft Accusations and Ritual Attacks, the report that we've launched today is available online now. You can access it through ACPF website, www.africanchildforum.org. So that's all we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us physically as well as online. So have a great day and week ahead. Thank you so much.